Hello, deep learners. I'm Andrew Ng, founder of deeplearning.ai, and I'm excited to welcome you to our global deep learning community. I know that many of you are here today because you want to break into AI and build your career. I hope that being part of this community will help you to do so. To give you a proper welcome, I'd like to show you around the deeplearning.ai offices and meet some of the teams so that you can see where it all happens.
Oh, hi, Andrew.
Do you want to tell our friends at Pine AI what you do at deeplearning.ai?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I make articles and other media that help people learn about AI and help them understand the huge impact that AI is having in the world. Today, I'm putting together the next issue of The Batch, our weekly newsletter, and I'm looking for the biggest stories of the week to keep our readers informed.
What's been the most surprising thing you've run into working on The Batch?
How much is going on in this field? There is never a dull moment. You might think from the outside that machine learning engineers really understand everything about AI, but nobody understands everything about AI because this field is just coming to life right before my eyes as I put this thing together every week.
All right, I know you're really busy, so I'll let you get back to it.
Thanks. See you later.
Let's go meet Kian, who helped me create the deep learning specialization. He's working on an exciting new project. Hey Kian, so do you want to tell the people at Pine AI what you're working on?
Yes, sure. I'm leading a project called Workera, focusing on helping people get offers in AI and navigating their career by testing their skills, preparing for interviews and certifying them, as well as matching and referring them to good jobs in AI.
That's really cool. And what's the most exciting part of your day?
You know, the AI field is new, organizations and jobs are still misunderstood. So I'm excited to help people understand what different types of jobs exist in the field, what tasks they will work on, and what skills are needed to achieve those tasks.
Yep, and that's really important work. Well, it's nice chatting, and now let's go chat with Hotel, who is on their product team.
Hey, Andrew.
Do you want to say hi to our friends at Pine AI and let them know what you're working on?
I would love to. Hi, everyone. I lead the product team in deeplearning.ai, where we create AI education content accessible to people all around the world. People like you.
And what are you most excited about right now?
I am so excited to see our community grow and to see how eager people are to learn more about AI.
Thanks, Hotel.
Thanks, Andrew.
So, as you can see, our team is working hard to support you and help you learn. It's never been easier than before to break into AI. So if you want to build a career, you can leverage online resources available, including open source code, datasets, papers, and online courses like a deep learning specialization on Coursera. As part of this journey, I hope you get your hands dirty too. Don't be afraid of diving in to build your own project, or go ahead and try to replicate a research paper that you're excited about. One thing that I've seen help a lot of people succeed is if you can build a community or find a community of fellow deep learners you can meet with and study with on a regular basis. In fact, I hope that this Pine AI meetup that you're at right now will be a good place for you to meet these people. I hope you enjoyed the event today and that you learn a lot, both from the talks and from each other. And once again, welcome to the deeplearning.ai community.
Good evening, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. Thank you so much for joining us for another Pine AI. Would like to give a special thanks always to deeplearning.ai for sponsoring the event, as well as for Eastern Virginia Medical School, EVMS, for bringing us this talk today. As you guys know, I'm Dr. Jose Morey. It's a pleasure to meet you. We're going to have a super interesting conversation, as we always do, with an amazing speaker today. I'd like to introduce Dr. Karina Parr. She is a friend and a dermatologist. She's been working in dermatology, obviously, throughout her whole professional career. She's worked in academics and private and public, different types of practices, as well as she's been chief of her department throughout her career. Dr. Parr, welcome to Pine AI.
Thank you, Jose. Thanks. Well, there's a lot of exciting things that are happening in dermatology. So there have been quite a few algorithms that help us recognize lesions. And with the skin cancer rates increasing and the shortage of dermatologists is getting worse, that's obviously very timely. Been a lot of studies that have shown these to be very effective and good models of care, so especially in teledermatology that can help improve access to care, and the studies show comparable diagnostic accuracy to dermatologists and higher than that of primary care physicians. So especially for integrated healthcare systems such as Kaiser or Veterans Health Administration, that can be super helpful because that could decrease the number of unnecessary biopsies and improve the visit triage. So a lot of exciting things are happening. If you have any specific questions, I'll be happy to answer too.
Yeah, absolutely. And please, everyone who's watching, go ahead and comment and ask questions as you want. And Dr. Parr, myself, will try to answer them to the best of our ability. But from an AI perspective, Dr. Parr, what have you noticed, kind of some of the biggest changes, I guess, from where AI in dermatology was maybe 5 or 10 years ago to where it is now? Like how has it affected the practice of dermatology? Has it really made that big of an impact from a real world perspective yet? And also, how have your colleagues been taking AI? Is it something that you are concerned about? Is it something that you're not concerned about? How do you view kind of where that's been going?
So I'll start with, how everyone's been accepting it. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about AI, of course, on many levels. And I myself, until I started looking into this subject further, was not clear on what that was exactly. And the more I learn about it, the more I'm excited about it. I don't think it's going to replace physicians, but it can really augment our diagnostic acumen, our diagnostic accuracy. And it can help us provide better care, I think. So, I think the reception is mixed. I think the more you know about it, the more you will probably be accepting of it and excited about it. So I do think that with advance of teledermatology now being used a lot more than 5 or even 3 years ago, AI will become probably more integrated because of the store and forward images that we use. We can now use dermoscopy images in store and forward dermatology. And of course, the algorithms can help triage certain lesions for, a faster appointment, for a faster biopsy. So I see that quite a bit. I see that advancing because of this. There have been devices that are getting approved in the US, and in Europe, there's an AI system called Mole Analyzer Pro. And so in the European market, it's been performing comparably with dermatologists. So in the setting of store and forward dermatology, and that's pretty big, because again, that will help improve access and help get these patients care that really need it, especially with the skin cancer epidemic in the Western world.
We have our first question from the audience. So Jonathan Light asks, looking forward to learning more about AI. Well, so are we, Jonathan. Thank you for asking. And how it shapes practices. So how has, in your opinion, Dr. Parr, how has this shaped, I guess, dermatopathology, specifically to Jonathan's question, and then other dermatology practices as well?
So there have been articles coming out in dermatopathology because there's some subjective evaluations variability too. What one person can read as a mildly dysplastic nevus, another person can say it's moderately or severely, or there's variability in how dermatopathologists diagnose melanoma. So there have been some applications in dermatopathology too. So that is definitely an emerging market for that.
Now, do you see it doing better with, or does the literature show that there are certain pathologies that it does better with than others?
So the problem, there's currently lack of generalizability. So they can't generalize some of these things because different populations have different presentations. Like amelanotic melanoma can look very different, so they can't really, from what I have seen, there hasn't been a lot of standardization in some of these studies, and it's difficult to standardize them currently. But I think as the images expand and as the AI systems have more and more images, I think that will probably be more accepted. So, and right now, medical legally too, from what everything I've read, is the FDA says none of these decisions could be made by AI. They're AI guided, but really the ultimate responsibility lies with the physician. And so I think that's another sort of difficult question to deal with. How much do you trust it? And if you're ultimately responsible, I think some of the decisions will be made a little bit differently.
In your circles in dermatology, are there discussions about the medical legal aspects of AI? Are
Yes,
people discussing
absolutely there are, especially in the medical legal environment we're in now. And let's say some states have tort reform, some don't. Some states are, there's more defensive medicine being practiced. And so if ultimately the decision is yours, then of course you may or may not always accept the AI as the gold standard, especially if you're going to be putting a name behind the decision. So, but I think, again, if you look at it as AI augmented and not really, AI replacing a physician's judgment, I think that could be helpful. It could triage, let's say, a large number of teledermatology consults. I think that may be helpful to see what needs to go to the top of your list, for example, and what needs to be seen sooner and evaluated sooner. That's the application I see for it in telederm especially.
And just for the audience's sake, Dr. Parr is probably one of the most well-known teledermatologists in the country, potentially the world, and definitely in Russia, I would argue. So she knows a lot in this particular field, specifically to how to grow practices and how to build it out. So highly respected from that perspective. Now you mentioned things that are going on in Europe and as opposed to here in the States. Have you found two questions? One is, are the Europeans, are they more accepting? Are they more progressed in these types of applications when it comes to AI and dermatology? And do you see other parts of the world that could potentially benefit from this as the technology expands?
Absolutely. When I've talked to my colleagues in Europe and in Russia about it, I think people are excited about it. Again, they have very integrated healthcare systems, slightly different models than here. And so access to care is a large issue, especially in areas that don't have a lot of specialists. And where I see that as very useful is for areas with fewer dermatologists, higher skin cancer rates. I think that would be very helpful because then anyone from anywhere in the world can access the expertise of a dermatologist, especially for complex issues, for skin cancers, for certain complex inflammatory skin conditions. So I see that being very useful, not only in Europe and the US, but for the rest of the world where expertise is needed. And I think there is a lot more potential to share expertise among countries to build up these image databases that we can help with education, in education, I think that would be very useful. I really like that in my teledermatology database. I like teaching based on that as well, because we could discuss the differentials right there.
Mr. Light has a second question that's come up. So has AI made its way to the iPhone apps in dermatology regarding telemedicine specifically?
So I will just tell you about what I know about apps on telemedicine. The Veterans Health Administration is working on an app for our patients to be able to send images and to standardize how these images are taken. So to me, that is sort of a form of AI. If we are making the app to take images in a more or less standardized way so they can be analyzed in a certain way. So I think it is getting there. Right now, we don't have algorithms that let the patient know what that is. Again, I think largely for medical legal reasons that may take a while. But we have educational programs, and apps that can help you narrow down differentials based on the images that are there. So I think that's a form of AI as well. So I think it's making it there. It's not quite there yet.
Now, in radiology, we obviously have a lot of AI imaging applications, so there's a lot of overlap. And we just had our first one that received a CPT code for reimbursement. Yeah, by a company called Zebra Medical Imaging that evaluates for vertebral body compression fractures. They have a lot of applications, but that's the one that just got approved. Are there any that you know of or have heard about that might be coming down the pipe for reimbursement within dermatology practices?
Not that I know of for reimbursement. That's, I think, will maybe lag behind a little bit. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Now, something else that happens in radiology is our residents are, well, at least for a couple of years, right there, our residents are really concerned, or the medical students are really concerned, oh, maybe we shouldn't go into radiology. We've heard that it might disappear. There's not going to be, machines are going to take over. And people would come to us and ask us, when the medical students would rotate or in forums or in conferences. In dermatology, have you noticed anything similar? Where are the medical students concerned about not the whole practice going away in the future? And have you seen any kind of drop off in medical students going into dermatology because of that?
I haven't seen any drop off in that. I think it's still a pretty desirable field. I've heard a couple of things like that mentioned, but usually from people who don't know the field that well, because we are still so heavily procedurally oriented, and there will always be procedures. Even if the AI algorithm helps diagnose a skin cancer, it will still need to be biopsied and excised. And, then for more complex inflammatory skin diseases, there are nuances in treatments, there are discussions about risks and benefits, and there are individualized, treatment plans for every patient. So I don't see it happening personally, AI replacing dermatology. I have heard, like you said, I've heard it from a few people, but usually not from someone who knows the field too well.
Right.
That makes sense.
No, it totally makes sense. And that's usually, at least it's always been my response in radiology. It's not just the field, it's people really understanding the limitations of what algorithms can actually do. Because it's still, even though there's so many cool advances and cool applications, most things are still limited to very simplistic and very kind of low-hanging artificial intelligence. So it's still, at least in medicine is so complex and multifactorial, and we don't have our data sets connected. So it's really hard to make really good predictions and really useful things that can really take over a whole physician, regardless of specialty.
Oh, I agree.
But we have our next question from Mr. Nolan Martin. Mr. Martin says, what roles are physicians playing in the development of machine learning technology, ML technology, beyond merely being end users? And if either of us have contributed ourselves, he would love to hear about it. So,
well, I think physicians like Jose are playing a bigger role than the rest of us. I have not contributed anything personally to the development of the algorithms. I am a user of teledermatology, teledermoscopy, but what about you, Jose?
Yeah, well, my background, I've done a lot of algorithm development, and still currently doing a lot of it. So physicians play a lot of roles within this. I'm a strong proponent of having more physicians involved in biotechnology as a whole. I believe that physicians should be involved in development of medical applications, medical tools. My soapbox for this is the same concept of when we didn't want to get involved in discussions around managed care. And then now all we do is complain about how we have to jump through hoops because of HMOs and stuff like that. But realistically, there weren't enough of us at the table. And as a lot of people say in that old adage, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And now we face the consequences of not being in those discussions and being actively involved in how these things are developed. So that's just my general soapbox, in that I think we need more MDs and DOs and healthcare providers involved in these kinds of things. Because if not, then people will create algorithms or create applications that have no concept of what real world medicine is like, whether it's, orthopedics, radiology, dermatology, and you need that. And at the end of the day, people that learn about coding and create zeros and ones don't come with an ethos that clinicians come with. I mean, we have this concept of our patients are, in some aspects, our whole life. And we understand that if you make a mistake in medicine, it's just not, they're not just ramifications for one individual life, but there are ripple effects with families and friends and coworkers. And when you take that kind of ethos to Silicon Valley or, Boston or wherever else is developing these types of biotech technologies, it's a very different perspective than someone that just comes from a pure, try fast, fail fast technology perspective. And so it brings a somber reality to what we're doing. And technology is a great way to help exponentially more patients than we can see on a regular day, right? We're limited by the amount of patients we can kind of see in an 8-hour, 9-hour, 12-hour, 14-hour shift, whatever you're working. So I believe we need to be involved with it. And from a machine learning pure perspective, what you're asking, I think clinicians need to be on from the ground up, ideation, strategizing, discussing the limitations of modalities. Like Dr. Parr knows the ins and outs of teledermatology, what works, what doesn't work, or dermoscopy, what works, what doesn't work. When she's actually seeing the patient there, what works, what doesn't work. Same thing with myself. I know the limitations of CT versus MRI versus ultrasound. So being able to talk with the technologists, with the coders on what that is very important. Understanding, I know Karina will probably give me a lot of gripe for this, and probably a lot of physicians, but we as physicians do know the other clinical aspects of it, even though we're famous for correlating clinically on all our exams. But you really need that if you're going to be developing an application, understanding what are the other components beyond just the imaging that go into you making a determination. It's part of that. And then from a nuts and bolts perspective, actually segmenting data. So just having millions of data sets doesn't help. I mean, it's the start, but if that data is not segmented and annotated appropriately, then you'll have the algorithms will come out and not work appropriately. So physicians often are involved in annotation of these types of images, and then also validating them, testing them. So going through that whole process of FDA approval. You have physicians involved in those things, and then real world data evidence. Physicians are involved in that. So there's a lot of ways to be involved in machine learning when it comes to healthcare. And with an MD, you don't have to necessarily stick to just your subspecialty. You can go and kind of branch out, because a lot of biotech companies are looking for clinicians. They need people that have that kind of background. And when I review a biotech company for a private equity firm or for an accelerator or a startup competition, if they don't have a clinician on the team, or at least on the advisory board, I usually have that a knock against them, because how are you going to treat patients if you've never treated a patient? Like, you need to come with that kind of ethos. And a lot of tech companies, I feel, get above, in front of their skis and start trying to do things that they shouldn't be doing. And you see a lot of them fail because of that. You've seen Google fail, you've seen Amazon fail. And it's not just the startups, big companies fail as well if they don't have that mentality that a clinician has somewhere in their development process. Jason B has a question. Can we pull that one up, Mr. Phillip? Thank you, sir. Do you see AI only proliferating in telemedicine, or also within the office, to augment a dermatologist's in-person diagnosis? This is from Jason B, Dr. Parr.
Thanks, Jason. Oh, absolutely. I think it will also proliferate in the office, and there already are, mole mapping and different types of technology like that. So I think it will be coming to the offices as well.
From your perspective, Dr. Parr, do you see limitations in the data? You mentioned your data sets. Have you seen in the literature or somewhere else where the algorithms work on everyone equally, or are there biases that the algorithms are having?
There have been reports of biases, but because of course whatever images go in, that's what the AI learning is based on, right? So not every image set is equal. And for example, if amelanotic melanomas, for example, they present very differently than regular melanomas. And so if the algorithm didn't have enough images to base the diagnosis on, the diagnosis may be incorrect. So there are some biases, but I think the more it's expanded and the more data goes into these AI apps, the better it will be. So some people talk about biases in equity as well and access to care, because not everyone would have access to these, to the apps or to technology. And so there's been some concern about that increasing the gap in healthcare equity.
Right. Dr. Parr, we have another question here from Mr. Light. Again, thank you, Jonathan. Medical students do talk about how AI may change future residency training and available positions. When should AI be taught in medical training?
Well, that's an interesting question. Well, I mean, you guys are learning about it right now, so that's great. And I think the earlier the better. I think everyone needs to be introduced to the concept, not even during medical training, but in college as well, and that could help you potentially choose a career path when you learn this. At least in the near future, I don't foresee AI changing the available slots, especially with our aging population and physician shortage. So I wouldn't worry about that too much quite yet, but I do think it will help medical education. I think it will just, back in my day when I was training, we didn't have access to visual DX. And, some of these apps now that you have, even Hippocrates was just coming out. And now you have all of this, I think it will be a lot more helpful. And I foresee that based on images, you'll have wider expanded differential diagnoses that you work with. So I think it should be taught as early as possible. I don't know. What do you think, Jose?
I would concur. I think it's funny you mentioned that Hippocrates wasn't around when you were training. It wasn't for me either, but I think that kind of gives our age away to a certain.
Guys.
So I think that's kind of funny. But no, I completely concur with you. I'm a strong proponent of having going even back, I'm a strong proponent of having coding as a second language starting from pre-K. I think kids should be learning how to code from the very start. I think from a competitive advantage at a geopolitical level, I think it's something that we are way behind from a public education perspective. I mean, STEM jobs are the jobs of today. It's not even the jobs of the future. They're the jobs of today. And there is almost nothing that machine learning and AI doesn't affect in our lives. Whether it's, Netflix telling us what we should watch, to, Tinder telling you who you should date, or to your email, finishing your emails for you. That's all federated machine learning. That's how Google created that. Same thing with text messaging applications. And in medicine, it's only going to be more and more and more. And I view it from a radiology perspective. I view AI and machine learning similar to modalities. Like in radiology, you have to learn the physics, and clinicians come to us all the time. Like they give us a call, and that's part of our job, right? They'll say, hey, I have this patient with X, Y, or Z. What do you think I should get? Should I get an ultrasound? Should I get a CT? Should I get an MRI? Should I get a nuclear medicine study? Well, it depends on what you're looking for. It depends on what you are trying to get out of that study. And then sometimes, like with some of the more advanced modalities, it's not just to push a button. Sometimes we have to make very specific kind of protocols if we're looking for something odd, something that doesn't fit into a general protocol, that we have to kind of tweak things to kind of pull out different parameters of the tumor or of the pathology that you're looking to do. that's the same kind of comparison I give for machine learning and AI in medicine. You have to know the limitations. And Dr. Parr just talked about, the different types of melanomas. Well, different algorithms might work better to be able to pull out nuances in those things. And then all the other kind of dermatologic pathologies, but beyond melanomas, how those things differentiate, like what's the pattern? Can I just look at one lesion, or do I need to look at the pattern of lesions? Do I need to just look at the lesion, or do I need to use natural language processing to understand more in the report of how the lesions developed over time? Is there something in the report specifically I should be looking at, like travel or exposure to certain chemicals or animals or previous ailments? All those things are important in understanding what algorithms work. What are the limitations of those algorithms? Just like, what's the limitation of MRI? What's the limitation of CT? You have to be able to understand the limitations of your tools. AI is just a tool. That's all it is. It will be the tool that will continue to grow and can continue to help, especially Dr. Parr mentioned how there's a doctor shortage. That's true for everything, especially right now with COVID and everything else. Like, everyone's overwhelmed. Everyone's overwhelmed. And there's no end in sight for when we're going to need help. So, necessity is the mother of invention, as they say, and we are in dire need right now. We're in dire necessity in healthcare. So these types of applications are things that will be able to help augment us and help take care of us as we move forward, and help us take care of our patients. But you have to know the limitations of the modalities you're using, just like you would with anything else. So I believe AI and machine learning and data analytics needs to be integrated into medical school training from day one, just like you do with how you study different types of studies. When you're going through peer-reviewed journals, you start learning about, all right, well, what are the different types of studies? What are the benefits of each study? What are the limitations of this study? So that when you practice evidence-based medicine and you're going through a study, you know whether to consider the evidence that you're learning right now, whether that's a strong indication that you need to change your practice, or whether that's just kind of a general direction of where data is kind of going, but not 100% practice changing. Same thing with artificial intelligence. What is it good for? What is it bad for? What is it in between? So if you're going to be using it as a tool, I think you need to be learning it as a tool from early on, in my opinion. Mr. Martin, Mr. Phillip, if you could pull up. Looks like Nolan is also a former Epocrates developer. So yes, it still exists in many. No, we can jump to the next one, but it still exists. We still use it. All right. How are you considering the cost of AI-based tools in your practice? And is the value of tools today in productivity improvement, inpatient safety, or something else?
So that's a very good question. I think, to me personally, the value is always in access to care. With the epidemic of skin cancer that's going on, and it is quite an epidemic. I mean, the numbers just keep rising. Of course, we're better at detecting it earlier, but especially in this area, so many people are affected by that. So to me, it's how many patients can I help and how fast. So that's the value of this to me, will be triage, who I need to be seeing faster and what benign lesions can wait. So that would improve not only productivity, but access and triage. So, and of course, patient safety, because if you do diagnose a skin cancer earlier, you have the intervention earlier and less likely metastases, etc. So to me, it's that. I think, yes, there will be cost to each and every one of these applications, but I think the benefits will outweigh any potential, costs and drawbacks. And I think you will make up for it on the other end. What do you think, Jose?
Yeah, I think it depends on your practice setting. I think that's one of the things. And it depends on you're asking clinicians. So
yeah,
what we think, it might be very different than the people that will end up buying it think. So if you're in your own private practice, and the clinician at the end of the day is the most important determination. But if you work in a public setting, then your public entity, whether it's a state or federal entity, makes these kinds of determinations. Obviously, they take into account what the clinicians want or say. That's definitely true. But they have their own kind of things that they're looking for, their hierarchy of importance. Same thing with in the private setting. If you work for a large healthcare practice, say a Kaiser, a Centera, a Riverside here locally, what the administrators may want might be very different than what the clinicians may want. They will listen, of course, but they also have the things that they are looking at, and they're looking at it from a system perspective, right? So it's nuanced depending on that. With all that being said, I think all of them that you just mentioned, depending on who you're talking to, might be the most important thing. Productivity is still very important in today's in the way that we financially operate in the healthcare system in the United States, at least on the private side. Things are still fee for service. There are bundled payments, and there are things that are really more about preventative medicine and really outcomes based, but a large majority is still fee for service. So as long as that still plays a bigger role, then I think productivity is always going to be a big determinant. Hopefully that will eventually go away. But for the foreseeable future, it will not. Patient safety is always important. I think that's something that will always come into play. I find that a lot of times patient safety within hospitals tends to be sometimes reactionary. Sentinel events happen, and then because you don't understand, systems are complex. Hospital systems are just like any other industry. They're complex, and sometimes you don't see the gaps in safety until they happen, and you're trying to set up safety nets. I think AI is a great way for a safety net. The application I was talking about that just got a CPT code, it plays a role in that. All it's looking for on CTs is vertebral body compression fractures. So when you have a CT of the abdomen, pelvis, or the chest, there's so much anatomy to look at, right? So, and most of the time, when you get a CT, unless it's a trauma patient, you're not really looking for fractures as your first thing. You're looking for typically some sort of generalized pain. That's the history, pain. Or sometimes you get no history. Sometimes it's just scan. And that's great because it plays as a little game with the ED docs or whoever is ordering the examination. So you're looking for all these things, and bones tends to be kind of one of the last things that people tend to look at in their search algorithm. So the application is really a patient safety issue, is to be able to help make sure that if there is a fracture, it alerts you. And at the end of the day, just like Dr. Parr said, it's still the physician that determines whether that's true or not, because you can get vertebral body height loss, not just in fractures. You get vertebral height loss and degenerative change and over time, sometimes congenital, developmental anatomy and stuff like that. So there are a lot of other reasons why there might be a loss in vertebral body heights, but it's really a kind of a patient safety issue. And I think other things that clinicians at least look for is quality QI issues. It really helps us. We tend to, from a radiology perspective, look at image quality. So having applications that can help that, improving throughput in CT scanners. Another one, reducing radiation. That's a big one in radiology, that there are a lot of applications using AI as new types of reconstructive algorithms to reduce radiation, to make essentially CT scans as little as a chest x-ray. So there are those types of applications. Things that help other people. It depends on what type of AI you're working on, right? Because it's kind of a big wastebasket term, really. But sometimes just process improvement of how you actually manage like HR and manage different FTEs, especially when there's surges, not just looking for people, but also for logistics of equipment. Those things are important. So there's a lot of different reasons as to what you might want in an application. But that's why it seems like you're a developer, Nolan, when you're developing an application, or if you have a startup, it's important to have a clinician, involved in the process of what you're creating, to make sure you're creating something that will be very beneficial to that patient population and to that clinician. So, do we have something else? Going back, Dr. Parr, you mentioned some biases. Have you noticed in dermatology or data in dermatology, you mentioned kind of inequalities. Have the algorithms, is there an attempt to improve data from underrepresented communities to ensure or try to minimize potential inequalities in the algorithms? Is that something that's been discussed or been researched?
There is an attempt in general in dermatology education to improve the recognition of lesions and rashes and skin of color, because a lot of common conditions present a little bit differently in patients with skin of color. And for example, we even here locally have Hampton University Skin of Color Research Institute, where Dr. Harvey, she's at TPMG now in private practice, but she is a co-creator of this institution. And they, they do a lot of research. They do outreach and education. So dermatology residents and students and clinicians, practicing clinicians can recognize that. We have, Skin of Color Society, and that they do a lot of meetings and, again, educational sessions. So I did see in Journal of Investigative Dermatology, they do mention that there needs to be an effort. And so I think there's work towards that right now in order to minimize inequities in healthcare and to improve the recognition of lesions and rashes that present differently. So there's definitely an effort, and we're moving towards that.
That's awesome. It's good to hear. And I think they just got a new infusion. Hampton University got a new infusion of capital. So I think they're going to be looking to expand a lot of different types of research. So that's exciting.
They're great. It's a great institute. They do a lot of good work for the community and just for education in general. And Dr. Harvey, she is one of the world experts, for the skin of color, writes textbook chapters. She's great.
That's phenomenal. What in what's coming down the pipe, what excites you the most, or what do you think is the most interesting applications that you see that are being developed or being researched right now?
So what excites me, again, is improved accuracy in skin cancer diagnosis by primary care physicians with the help of AI tools, because, again, there's so few of us and there's so much more cancer. And especially, like you mentioned, with COVID, not a lot of people could go to a specialist. Not a lot of people wanted to get out, And I'm also excited about the teledermatology applications of it, where people from remote areas can send us images, and sort of already do, but with AI it will be even better, because we can get on the top of our queue of what we need to look at faster. And so I see so much skin cancer and so advanced in a lot of presentations, in patients who have had a lot of sun exposure, and especially in the veteran population, they're disproportionately affected, I think, by cancer. So to me, the application to cancer diagnosis, faster access to skin cancer care, that's, to me, is the most exciting aspect of AI and the best potential.
I think we'd be remiss, with everything going on right now. Have you seen COVID expedite, or what kind of role has COVID played with dermatology that you've been seeing in your practice? And do you see any role in AI besides what you just mentioned, helping you guys in your workload and what you're doing day to day?
Oh yeah, COVID propelled teledermatology. I think it did expedite the acceptance of teledermatology, because we do a lot more store and forward and live video visits now. So I think it's much more accepted now, not just by clinicians, but by patients as well, who need to get faster access to specialty care. So that's been exciting too. And I don't think we're going to go back even after eventually, access is better to in-person televisits. But I have patients now personally that used to never use technology, that became so well versed with it, sending photos and videos. And so that's been exciting to see. And I do see a potential for AI in that regard as well. I think as time goes on, the algorithms will help us prioritize what lesions get addressed first.
Yeah, that's awesome. We have similar applications in radiology, where it's really just to do the risks or which scans we're looking at first, because we don't know. Obviously, the stats get read first, and there's some places have super stats, but there are applications out there that will go through and find one or two things. Like they might find a pulmonary embolism, if that's the application, or might find a head bleed or a stroke. And then the app will tell you, hey, this we believe, or a pneumothorax, we believe that a pneumo or brain bleed has been found in this image, and so it'll move that study to the top of the study, even if it's not stat. It could be a routine outpatient one, but it'll scan it and then say, hey, this was found, and then it'll pump it to the top of the list. So it helps you make sure that things aren't lost. When you have a busy day in the ED, and you have 10 cases pending, it can at least identify cases that could potentially save someone's life if something disastrous is trickles down to an hour later because of the workload that you have. Jonathan Light has a question. We recently received AI-based ultrasound scanners that automate labeling of anatomic structures. Will these AI tools help medical students learn or hinder? So beyond just ultrasound, just from a dermatology perspective, and then I'll address the ultrasound. What do you think, Dr. Parr? Is AI something that will help teach future medical students and future dermatologists, or hinder their learning?
I think it will depend on the student, right? Because I think what you put into your learning, that's what you will get out. I don't think it will replace you knowing anatomy. I don't think it will replace you getting basic understanding of pathophysiology of certain conditions. So that's, sort of I guess it's a vague answer, but I do believe that it will totally depend on the students, because I think if you come to it with the realization that it doesn't replace your hours of studying, that it's there to augment your learning, it will. But if you rely on that solely to educate you and to sort of, make decisions for you, then I think you'll be disappointed.
Yeah, I would concur with Dr. Parr. I think, Jonathan, a really good example of something that has a parallel that I would look at is the airline industry. So airlines, pilots, it's very automated, right? There's even jokes about, oh, well, the plane kind of flies itself and the pilots are just kind of there. But realistically, that's a good industry that's shown us when something is highly automated, the importance of keeping up with training and basic training and going back and making sure you have really good CME and really good continuous education. Because even though the system is 99%, proof that nothing's going to happen, or 99.9%, you still need very high level technical humans there when the system breaks. Because when the system breaks, it can be cataclysmic. And the same thing, it's healthcare. So yes, you potentially, and this is a really excellent question, what you're saying, I think could 100% happen. Like, we've seen some of it already happen, right, to a certain degree, where people rely a lot on radiology to make diagnoses, and the whole physical exam kind of, at least Dr. Parr and I hope Jonathan or other medical students, I hope you have that amazing clinician in internal medicine that was just, just blows your hat off with just how they ask questions and how they can make diagnoses just by looking at the patient and maybe doing one or two physical exam things. That's what medicine was really all about. Now it's very technical, and now people really rely on radiology and other kind of diagnostic tools to kind of make the determination, and they lose those things like physical exams. Same thing with even different skill sets sometimes, like paracentesis and thoracentesis that used to be done a lot about internal medicine, now gets a lot done by radiology. So if you rely on something else to make that determination for you, then yes, you can potentially lose that skill set. So I think that's what you're alluding to. But that's why I point to the airline industry, that you need to rely on those new technologies because they are oftentimes more safe, and the repetition and all that, there's all these safety nets using those types of technologies. But we need to learn, and it's something within medicine that we need to do more and more as AI becomes more and more pervasive. We need to learn how to reinstitute and maintain our skills for when the machines break, for when we don't have the algorithms to work anymore. It's really important that we set up a structure that we do teach people to not have to rely on those things, because when they fail, it's when you need the humans to step in and say, all right, well, we can still do it. It helped us and it was a good safety net, but it's not essential to do what we need to do to help our patients and to make sure that this person survives X, Y, or Z intervention. So what I would say, if no other questions from the crowd, Dr. Parr, I'd like to ask you one last question, and thank you so much for your wisdom, your friendship, your guidance, and your mentorship to these students. But if you had something to say about the future of dermatology to these medical students or future budding dermatologists, what would you like them to know about the future of dermatology in your perspective?
Well, thank you, Jose, for kind words, and feelings very mutual. So I think dermatology is a very exciting field. I mean, obviously I'm biased towards it. I love it. I think we need more dermatologists. I think future of dermatology is exciting. I don't think any of us will be replaced by the machines in any specialty. So if you hear that, please tell these people that these are not very well thought out fears. But so I think the dermatology future is bright. We would love to have more of you interested in applying into dermatology, and feel free to reach out to me. Jose has my contact information if you need it. So.
Well, thank you very much. And everyone that tuned in, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for the phenomenal questions. Love the engagement. Thank you for the thoughtful crafting of them. I hope this was something that challenged you. I hope this was something that inspired you. And I hope you all go out and continue to push medicine forward, whether with your patients or with technology, or ideally with both. So thank you all very much. And until next time, have a good night.
Thank you. You too.